As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a first-time guest tonight. His name is Kerry Lutz. He is the founder and host of the Financial Survival Network. You'll find him at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Kerry, thank you for joining us for the first time here on Reluctant Preppers.
Hey, well, my pleasure to be with you.
It was a great boon in my life to have met you in person at the 2 Liberty Mastermind symposia that I attended, one in Dallas, Texas, and the other in Las Vegas, Nevada, and to see the roster of speakers that you had lined up there, to get to talk with them directly and network with others. We've made a lot of connections there, and a lot of them have ended up being guests on this channel. But I just wanted to let our audience know that you've been active in this arena for some time, talking about sound money and non-traditional sources of information and empowering people to make aware and prepared choices. So just wanted to thank you for that work. And if we could just take a minute to explain to the audience what your mission is as you see it at this time, because you've certainly had a growing attendance at your Financial Survival Network channel. So if you could talk to us just a little bit about what your mission and purpose is there.
Yeah, well, the way I see it is there's so many opinions about what's going to happen, where we're heading, and what I realize is very few people actually know what's going to happen. It's everybody's best guess. But something is brewing. You know, the world financial system is going to revamp, reorganize, and it's kind of up to you, up to everyone to kind of find your way in the new economy. And, you know, like I say, what the money's going to look like, what the world's going to look like, I really don't have any idea. But I think it's helpful to have a plan, even though you really don't know. So my purpose, the way I look at it, is to kind of be a messenger, if you will, of many, many different viewpoints, different philosophies, different just orders, if you will, and different opinions. And some of them I agree with, some of them I think are absurd, some of them I partly agree with, and many I don't. And I feel that my purpose is kind of just to present them in the best possible light. And then you decide if any work for you, and at least to get you thinking, well, gee, you know, things might not be the way the mainstream media is portraying them. Things might be more serious, or, you know what, maybe the mainstream media is right. Maybe we're out of the recession and everything is fine.
Sorry.
Take your pick. So, you know, you got a smorgasbord of different ideas, concepts, and thoughts coming from people of totally major different backgrounds, different experience. You take what you like, you leave what you don't like, combine it, and you come up with your own opinion and your own plan of action if you think it's necessary. But at least you can't say that nobody told you.
You know, it's so true. When I think of your key role as the co-founder of the Liberty Mastermind Symposia, you were instrumental in bringing together, you had like 16 speakers at least at each of those, and they were widely varied from their expertise. Some were completely, precious metals, sound money gurus. Some were into Bitcoin. Some were talking about other liberty or liberty of thought, liberty of property and territorial rights. Some were talking about survival aspects in different senses, and all the way from a physical, material, financial, spiritual, everywhere in between. You were an aggregator, kind of providing that venue, bringing people together, bringing the people who had perspectives and insights together with people who were seeking awareness. That's really been a position you've been playing, and I will say with increasing effectiveness as you've built an audience both on your own channel, but also been serving kind of in that enabling and connecting role, helping people get connected with information that they will not get from corporate mainstream sources. So in that role, what are some emerging major themes that you see, sort of affinity clusters? If you could maybe highlight maybe 3 or 4 or so major themes that you've heard emerging as that seem to you to be, no matter where people come down on them specifically, they seem to be significant, material, and worthy of further understanding on the part of people in our current day, as well as likely to be important and impactful in the near-term future.
Well, clearly there's a debt problem. I think unless you've been living, you were frozen in a cryogenic tank or in a coma for the past 20 years, you have to know there's a major problem with debt at every level of society and in every country in the world. And that our money supply, our money is a debt-based currency. And at some point, we're probably going to run into trouble here. So that's number one. Number two, the United States system here is really facing a lot of major challenges. The government, from escalating debt, government debt at all levels, pension plans that don't have the funds to pay off the promises that were made by various government officials going back many, many years. And then we have it as well with numerous promises, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, you name it, going to be very impossible to meet those promises. And then we've got just the ability to govern us and to face these problems and make difficult choices. It seems like we've lost the ability to do that. I'm not seeing that happen. The divisiveness. We've been divided many times in the history of this country, but it never seemed to be to the point that we're divided now. And, this both sides of the aisle. And I believe that, the Democratic Party is the party of communism, socialism, but I don't believe that the Republican Party is a whole heck of a lot better. They seem to be the party of corruption, subsidies, big business, and all of this. And it's just disgusting what they've devolved into. They don't stand for anything any better than the Democrats. It's the uniparty, whoever is in office. So these issues, I just don't see them clearing up, whether it's cyclical. I've seen that what I've learned is cycles do play a role in all of this, but I'm not so sure how easy it is for the average individual to interpret these cycles. The people who are really good at it see things that you and I probably would never observe. So we're facing a lot of these challenges, and then the overseas challenges. A lot of things are screwed up, and whether it's in Europe or in Asia. I mean, I was in China about 6 months ago. Now, everybody talks about China being in a bubble and everything else, and no doubt that's true. My perception of China is what's going to bring them down is not economics. What's going to bring them down is pollution. The air is so bad, the water is so bad, all the quality of life that you should be an ascendant economy should be improving is getting worse. And the people will revolt when there's a die-off of tens of thousands of people because the air gets so bad, and they have their version of Bhopal, India, and thousands of people die. And this is going to happen. They got to the point recently in Shanghai, they went around willy-nilly shutting down factories because the air got so bad. And I don't see them solving this problem. More and more cars on the road. So I'd like to think that technology could help solve a lot of these problems, but it's just not happening. I don't see it. So all of these things are going to reach some type of crescendo within the next several years, and we're going to be forced to deal with it. I just don't know when. But it looks like we're getting to this point where the economics and everything else, I mean, I don't believe we're running out of stuff. A lot of people believe energy, we're not going to have enough of that. But I do believe that population growth is an issue that it's going to have to be dealt with. And you can't have the population keep growing at the rate that it's growing and expect to be able to deal with it. The fact that we have as well as we have for this long is a testament to our amazing resourcefulness. Maybe we can deal with it some more, but certainly growing population is going to be an issue as well.
So if we could kind of chip away, were there any other major themes that we should address? Because this is a good list, and I'd like to dig in and ask you some specific questions in each of those areas, unless you'd like to add anything else to the list.
Oh, gee, I mean, there's lots of other issues, minor, major, the money system.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
There's so many, but I think that's a pretty solid list right there.
Okay.
Because I think if we were predisposed to solve our problems rather than kick the can down the road, the monetary system wouldn't really be the huge problem that it's going to be. So
right. Okay, well, let's start then with the debt, which was the first mega issue that you identified. And one thing that's been confusing to a lot of our viewers, and that they've submitted a lot of questions around that, is just getting clarification. It's kind of, in so many ways, living in this world today is disorienting to people, because it seems like so much of conventional or innate knowledge, common sense, doesn't seem to hold. It doesn't. Certainly, politically correct political correctness contradicts a lot of common sense these days, but also just sort of suspending what seems to be time-tested and time-proven judgment seems to be the fashion for the last several decades. One of which is about debting. Most people that are members of our channel are in the latter half of their earning years, and they've taken on significant life responsibilities. They're wanting to make sure that they take good care of their own family's finances and protect themselves from undue risk. But they look to, as you mentioned, government debt, for example, at every level, from sovereign debts around all countries of the world, to states that are deeply in debt, to major metropolitan cities that are deeply in debt. And we've heard regions in China that are in debt, and a lot of it's off books, and because they don't like to admit it, and on and on and on. Shadow debts and so on. This is just the official debt. I mean, not even talking later about that. We'll talk about the pensions and unfunded liabilities and stuff like that in a little bit. But right now, just the official government debts being out of control. And what has been unnerving to a lot of people is that all of the traditional knowledge and wisdom about you're not free if you're in debt deep enough, they can finally say no and just come and take everything that you have, take your assets, and you'll be a slave, and that you don't have liberty as long as you're reliant on debt. We're told, don't worry. This doesn't apply here, because we can just keep getting deeper and deeper in debt. So if you could address for us a couple points on the reality of the debt, and that is, first of all, if all these populaces owe, to whom is the debt really owed? That's the first question.
Yeah, well, different people are the creditors of different countries. The U.S., most of it's owed internally, but a lot of it's owed externally for external creditors: Japan, China, Europe, different countries, a few $1 trillion, maybe it's $6 or $8 trillion external debt of the United States. it's different every country you go to. So, in the event of a default, well, governments have been defaulting on their debt for hundreds of years already, actually thousands. So there's nothing new about that. In our lifetimes, we've seen numerous debt defaults, and life just goes on. But now we're getting to the point where all these countries are going to default, including the biggest of them all, the U.S. So we either default by just printing up new money, making the currency worthless, or we just out and out default, which probably won't happen. So either way, it's a bad situation. Debt by default by, just explicit default, or default by simply repudiating by printing. There's three different ways to default. Repudiation of your debt, kind of like Cuba did when Castro took over. Repudiation by the printing press, where you just devalue your currency like Germany did post-World War I, pre-World War II. And then there's the debt jubilee, where everybody's debt just is forgiven. So probably the best way to go about it is a jubilee, but then the banks, because in this society, everybody's debt is somebody else's asset. So, because that's how the savings, well, there is no savings anymore, but that's how money gets recycled and reinvested. So there's no good way for all of this to end, but at some point it kind of has to, because government just is too indebted, and so are the people. So it's going to happen.
So if we could press you just a little bit further on that, when you mention the government is too indebted, but then there may be just a jubilee, or maybe just repudiated, or whatever. I mean, why would that be necessary if, in fact, there is no real, there's really no paying the piper, there really is no hard and fast natural consequence that's going to befall a country that just keeps going further and further in debt? Or do you mean you can only go so far until everyone has to admit you can't service the debt because it just eats up all of your current expenses, and so you just have to start over? What do you mean when it seems like you're saying two things? One is the end is coming to that. It can't keep going the way it's going. The other is, but when the end comes, it doesn't have to be that disruptive or that traumatic.
It's got to be disruptive, because the ability to service the debt, the debt's growing way faster than GDP, so you can't raise taxes to pay it. So you've got to basically print money to pay it. You just can't have it all both ways. So the debt gets liquidated one way or the other. Either gets paid off, forgiven, or defaulted upon. And what else can you do? So it's going to be unpleasant, to say the least, because you can't service it, and then you start printing up too much money, then the money loses its value, and something has to give.
If we can just ask you about the scale of that between the individual and this huge scale of the state. On the individual level, if you can't pay your mortgage payment, your mortgage debt to the bank, eventually the sheriff shows up at the front door and you are forced to move out, and the asset goes back to the bank, and the bank owns both the asset and the debt that went with it. But you're out of the house and you don't own anything at that point. In the case of a country, if you don't pay your debt, is there an analogy of who's the sheriff that shows up at the door, and do you have to move out, or what happens?
Not really. I mean, you could partially default and partially pay. There's options. You negotiate the default. That's Peter Schiff's way. But in all likelihood, the more I think about it, the more I think a jubilee is what's going to happen. I just believe that's everybody's debts get forgiven. I just see it in history. That's what's happened in the Bible.
At the national level. you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's just human nature for debts to get out of control and not be handled. And at the individual level, too. There will be a debt jubilee one day. There won't be any choice. There just won't be a choice.
If we could turn our attention to the U.S. system and entitlements, you mentioned a whole bunch of different topics underneath that. Could we start with the pensions and unfunded liabilities? You talked about promises that cannot be kept. Partly you mentioned, I think you mentioned or implied demographics are changing that as more and more people reaching that, like Social Security entitlement age, pension retirement age. Can you talk a little bit about what you see? It looks like a train wreck that's coming towards us. What do you see coming in terms of promises that cannot be kept?
Well, certainly Social Security, Medicare, the cost of those programs is just becoming unsustainable, and nothing's being done to rein them in. So as we go on, they'll become more unsustainable. So something has to give. And yet a large percentage of the population relies upon Social Security and Medicare for their golden years. So what's going to happen there? Interesting question, because you have less workers supporting more retirees. So something has to give. I don't know. We need in the Greeks, they didn't know how to end plays.
Deus ex machina.
Yeah, that's what we really need.
You need this crane that just comes and lifts you up into the clouds, and that's how you solve the problem. And then a miracle occurs.
Yeah, it was like translated into the hand of God.
Yeah.
So the hand of God would reach down and perform a miracle, and everything would work out fine. So short of that, maybe it's technology, so none of us have to work and everything becomes free. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that none of our leadership has a clue. And they're just, every day we go by without a default, every day we're not in bankruptcy is a victory.
So let's zero in on that. So I mentioned that a lot of the demographics of our subscribing audience and viewers are in the latter half of their earnings career. So they're keenly interested on achieving financial independence and retirement, that sort of thing. So let's focus on that, because as you're mentioning, we don't see it realistically that Social Security or Medicare or any of these other, or even a lot of private pensions, government pensions or private pensions, are going to be able to keep their promises. So what do the experts you talk to recommend the ordinary person do to take care of themselves if they want to make sure that they're not left, a beggar at the end of this, whatever is going to happen?
Well, I still see some precious metals being the ideal insurance policy against chaos, for sure. And you have to look at that. Bitcoin seems to be coming into its own, and probably that will be the new currency in your lifetime and mine. Some type of cryptocurrency where the government just really can't screw around with it because they have no control over the quantity of it, but not as an investment necessarily, but as a wealth protector, perhaps. Silver, precious metals, and you need to prepare. You should be prepared for an emergency no matter what, whether it's a flood, an earthquake, a volcano, drought. You should have some food on hand and means of self-preservation, whatever that means to you. So I think that's really, really important, because you don't know what's going to happen ever. And there's been lots of disruptions, natural disasters and man-made disasters. And so it's important for some type of plan, some type of preparation to be made. I'm not going to get into telling you what type of self-preservation tools that you should have on hand. Mm-hmm. You can figure that out on your own. That's an individual choice, but better to have it than to not have it. So
The next area you mentioned was the breakdown in the ability to govern effectively. We've seen this just crippling divisiveness where it seems that both major parties in the U.S. are taking basically positions of opportunity regardless, not based on principle. You're worried about leaks if they're happening against you. You say that leaks are virtuous and good if they're happening against your opponent, and on and on. On both sides of that, voting for raising the debt ceiling is unconscionable if you're the party that's out of power, but it's necessary and responsible if you're the party that's in power. It's like there's no moral difference, but you just flip positions from hot to cold, black to white, and back and forth, depending on whether or should I say red to blue, blue to red, depending whether you're in or out of office. What's comical is that it's just so evident and everybody can see it, but they keep a straight face, and they're not breaking character. They're doing a really good job of not breaking character. So, but everybody can see that Washington is grinding to a halt as far as being able to effectively unify and accomplish things together for a greater good. So, can you talk about aspects of that you or guests on your channel have pointed out, and where you see that leading?
Well, it's we're talking political solutions, and we're rapidly running out of them. If something happens that I just wrote an article today that basically we need to come together somehow, accept our problems, and deal with them. And if we can't do that, then it's just going to be a real big problem. And, the Trump transformation just isn't going to happen here. So we've just been wasting money and living high on the hog on our credit cards for too long. So the political party's kind of irrelevant. The country's dominated by these interest groups on all sides of the spectrum, and nobody, no politician is a leader. At least Trump is a leader, and he's trying his best to lead right now. But when you've got the likes of the U.S. Congress there, I don't know how you lead. Well, up until Trump, we've had what the military calls management without leadership. And if you've ever run a company, if you don't provide leadership to your employees, you're going to fail, because what we have is management and no leadership. And that's what's wrong in a lot of the country, a lot of business as well, is no leadership. So important, but till we get it, it's just not going to make any difference. So jury's out on Trump. He's quirky. He's got a lot of interesting character flaws, but a lot of interesting assets too. So you can't really decide. I think his administration gets judged by its response to externalities, crises that take place, more so than the policies that he seeks to implement. That's where I see it happening. I don't think the parties wind up doing anything. I think he winds up kind of just taking control because they won't do anything.
That's what I was going to ask you next. It seems like, he talked about draining the swamp, and it seems like the swamp is fighting back at this point, if in fact that's what we're seeing. And the question that you mentioned is that if you have this management without leadership, you get an entrenched bureaucracy that's mostly interested in its self-preservation and growth rather than in actually solving anything. Because to actually solve the problem, it could be smaller than, because you could have a healthier system that doesn't need all this life support from this huge parasite of the government attached to it. So a good government would be one that's working to put itself into a much smaller role. You don't see that happening. And no. So the question is, will Trump, in your opinion, or the opinion of your guests that you've interviewed, have the personal fortitude to actually move the dynamic of the system off of that sort of permanent homeostasis where it's stuck, just sort of doing its own self-preservation and growth of government, to actually shift the balance of the whole system into something that can actually make a difference for the ordinary person.
Well, he's up to his elbows in alligators. Let's face it, the swamp here, the swamp people. I just don't know. It's a fight to stay in power for him. I don't know how it's going to be. I really don't. We're in uncharted waters here, so I'm just not sure.
Okay, well, let's turn the attention to overseas. You mentioned Europe, but I didn't hear any specifics that you're seeing as major issues, major potential risk, or major mega trends in Europe specifically.
Yeah, well, we'll have to kind of leave it at this because I'm going to have to go. But multiculturalism, the so-called refugee flow, the incompatibility of the countries who've joined together to have a common currency, but nothing else. The United States of Europe concept created to kind of displace the leadership of the U.S., which Europe rightfully had grave concerns about, but they're in no position to displace. So it was like a pipe dream to start with. Milton Friedman foresaw its dissolution many, many years ago, almost from the start. And, we're living to see it because they're out of control with the debt as well. So
yeah,
we're just, they were worse than we were. The German banks, their banks are in a horrid shape.
Yeah.
And they're just worse problems than we have, because at least the United States has got a Second Amendment, it has freedom of speech, all of these other rights enshrined in the Bill of Rights. They have a constitution from the European Union that's hundreds of pages long that protects nothing. So
yeah, right.
It's really teetering. And, I was thinking that Marie Le Pen would win. Now I'm not so sure, but I think she's got a heavy burden to overcome. So, let's see what happens here.
And next time, if we could have you back another time to talk about, we didn't get into the monetary system, cashless society, workerless economy, and the paradox of growing population concerns versus aging population concerns. So are we at the tipping point, or are we past the point of no return? So if we could plan on having you back again to kind of take a crack at some of those, that'd be awesome. And just thank you so much, Kerry, for joining us for this first time from Financial Survival Network here on Reluctant Preppers.
Hey, it was my pleasure anytime, and we'll look forward to having you on our show as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Kerry.